Hi guys, tonight's flipped lesson is all about famous writers of the progressive era. So we're going to be looking at exactly what is the progressive era to start off with. And progressivism starts somewhere around 1890, maybe a little bit before, and it goes all the way up until about 1920. It was mainly a reaction to the Gilded Age. And it was looking to fix the problems that were created because of the Gilded Age: abuses in government, abuses in society, abuses in business. Most of the people believed that the government needed to be more involved in creating progress because people weren't going to change on their own. Businesses weren't going to suddenly have a conscience and decide to change their ways. They needed the government to tell them that they had to change. Most of the people that are going to be involved in this are going to be urban and middle class, and there's also going to be a high number of women that are involved in this particular movement. Now, the writers are actually going to be the ones that really bring this movement to the forefront and really kind of get it started. And these people are known as muckrakers. Muckrakers were investigative journalists who drew attention to problems from the Gilded Age. And they covered everything from the ruthlessness of monopolies and child labor and race and corruption and all kinds of other things. And they wrote in a variety of sources. Now, they get their name because of Teddy Roosevelt, who gave them a nickname of muckrakers. Muck being the bad parts of society, or what we might usually call poo, and the rakers. If you rake up poo, you're trying to clean it up, but you're also releasing the stench, drawing people's attention to it. So they're cleaning it up, but drawing attention to it at the same time. So the newspapers that they wrote in were everything from the New York Journal and the New York World to major magazines like McClure's. And yes, Cosmopolitan was actually a real newspaper, a real magazine with real news in it at one time. And a lot of them wrote their own books as well. Um, Not everybody respected these people because even though they were drawing attention to these problems that needed to be fixed, a lot of people, including Teddy Roosevelt, were a little bit critical of them because they felt that they were um, inflammatory, that they were inciting anger over issues, but didn't provide any solutions to these problems. And so that is going to be one of the big pushes as time goes on, is that the muckrakers are going to look to create actual change. So who are these people? We've already talked about one of them, which is Jacob Riis. He wrote How the Other Half Lives, which was that series of photographs and descriptions of life in the tenements, 5 Points, New York, most dangerous part of New York City. You also have Lincoln Steffens. He wrote The Shame of the Cities, which exposed public corruption, specifically of political machines. Then you have Ida Tarbell. She wrote The History of the Standard Oil Company, and I bet you guys are going to be able to figure out what hers was all about. She's actually credited with hastening the breakup of Standard Oil because of this expose. And finally, Samuel Hopkins Adams, who wrote The Great American Fraud. And what he was doing is he actually revealed a lot of the fraudulent claims of quote unquote medicines from that time. Showed that they were more harmful than they were good. And as we've learned, a lot of the time they were just filled with either useless stuff or they were filled with narcotics or alcohol. So obviously not that effective. But the most well known of all of the muckrakers is this man right here. His name is Upton Sinclair, and in 1906 he wrote a book called The Jungle. It was a novel that detailed the plight of the immigrant working class in the meatpacking district of Chicago. Chicago was the number one industry, or number one place for the meatpacking industry. His book looked at poverty and the absence of social programs, as well as the horrible living and working conditions for the working class. And it actually was called by author Jack London being the Uncle Tom's Cabin of wage slavery. So it was a very effective book in drawing attention to wage labor. It was about a young man by the name of Jurgis Rudkis, who was an immigrant from Lithuania, and his young wife, and basically the mistreatment by his employers and the wealthier members of society. Now, Sinclair wanted to show people just how bad things were for these poor immigrant workers. Unfortunately, people had a vastly different reaction. The reaction to the book was not as Sinclair had intended. Readers focused on the graphic descriptions of the unsanitary conditions of the meatpacking plants and the disgusting results of these conditions. Because of this book, domestic and foreign purchases of American meat fell by half. He wrote in Cosmopolitan magazine in October of 1906, he said, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach." It brought about a lot of public support for possible congressional legislation and regulation of the meatpacking industry. In 1919, he published another muckraking book called The Brass Check that looked at American journalism, specifically yellow journalism and the problems of it. And in 1943, he actually won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for his works. So, what are the effects? Well, the jungle ended up being the inspiration for the Meat Inspection Act. And surprisingly, the person that was the spearhead for this was President Teddy Roosevelt. He read the book. He was an avid reader, and he read this book, and he was just disgusted by what he read. So he demanded an investigation of the meatpacking industry. And even though those people heard about the inspection and cleaned up, the inspectors were still disgusted by the things that they found. They came back, they reported to the president, and he demanded that there was something to be done about this, some kind of regulation for it. And so this is where we get the USDA. The USDA, where they actually inspect the meat that you buy. So next time you go to In-N-Out, it's gonna be actual beef and not some random critter that they picked up on the side of the road. The other thing that this is going to inspire is the Pure Food and Drug Act. At this time, as we've seen, there's a lot of harmful drugs within medicines. And so we decide that this is no longer a good thing, and it was to ensure proper labeling of food and drugs, prevent tampering, and also make sure that drugs were safe. Now, as far as muckraking for minorities, we have a few authors that are really going to bring attention to race issues in America. The first of which is a really awesome lady by the name of Ida B. Wells. She was just a spitfire for her day, and she was very outspoken in not only race relations, but also women's rights and issues for Native Americans. She was a very outspoken woman. In her pamphlet, she documented lynching in the United States and how it was used as a way to control or punish blacks who competed with whites. She also was one of the first to use the definition of rape as actually the cause of most lynchings, or the threat of rape, or using that as the excuse to hide the real reason for lynchings, which was blacks being a threat to whites, being a racial threat to them. The other one is actually not African American. His name is Ray Stannard Baker, and he actually wrote a series of articles about the plight of African Americans, specifically after or since Reconstruction. In this, he looked at race relations. He also looked at political leadership, the Jim Crow laws, lynching, poverty, and so on and so forth. And it was eventually taken from being a series of articles to an actual book called Following the Color Line. But the two I really want to focus on are two men, the first of which is Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was a man who advocated for the equality of African Americans through economic advancement, through hard work. He created, or was part of the creation of, the Tuskegee Institute, and this was an all-black school as a vocational school for African Americans to learn a trade. He was born in Virginia as a slave. He put himself through school and became a teacher. He helped found the Tuskegee Institute, and he became well known as a spokesperson for African Americans. In 1895, he gave a speech called the Atlanta Compromise, and in this he stated that Southern blacks would work meekly and submit to white political rule, while Southern whites would guarantee that blacks would receive basic education and due process and law. It was a compromise between blacks and whites to ensure some level of stability, a level of civility between the two. He said that blacks would not fight for equality, they would not fight for integration or justice, and whites would need to fund black educational charities. And this was actually fairly popular amongst a large number of both blacks and whites in the South. It was seen as a very easy way to ease into equality for blacks. However, his counterpart is W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, this man was born in the North and never knew slavery himself. He advocated equality for African Americans through political and governmental changes, which is part of the reason why he was big in the creation of the NAACP. This was created to help colored people, and at the time, colored people included everyone who wasn't white. That actually included Jews, that included Italians, that included Chinese, it included everybody. It wasn't just African Americans, though they were the main focus. Du Bois rose to national prominence as a leader of something known as the Niagara Movement. This was a group of African American activists who wanted equal rights through political means. These two men are actually going to be the focus of our lesson, our activity in class today. And I want you guys to really think about what their two ideas might mean, how their conflicting ideas on how to gain equality for blacks is going to affect the black community. Is it going to affect them positively by giving them more choices, or possibly negatively because they're fighting against each other? So with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.